All right, good morning, everybody. Just wanted to welcome everyone who's already dialed in. We are just going to wait a couple more minutes for some others to join, so we'll kick off at 11:03, if that's okay. So grab a tea or coffee, settle in, we'll start shortly. All right, so we might kick off, everyone, if that's okay. Good morning, and thank you all for dialing in to the second webinar of It Takes a Village. So this one is about how we can all play our part in keeping children and young people safe online, targeted more for parents, carers, adults, and some organisational stuff as well. So welcome. My name is Laura Giblett. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm part of the National Safeguarding Unit at the Y. Today's session will be co-hosted with some wonderful people. So we've got some from the NSU, a fantastic young person from the Y, and we're very lucky to have a leading child safety and workplace relations lawyer from Moore's legal practice as well, who we'll introduce shortly. Just before we did start today, I'd like to acknowledge that whilst we're all meeting from various parts across the country, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending this webinar. The lands that I'm on today belongs to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. We do just have some general housekeeping before we start. So if you do experience any tech difficulties, I'll be taking questions and responding in the chat function. I do my best to help you where I can. So you'll see the question panel just on the right-hand side of your screen. So please do shout if you need anything and I'll do my best to respond. We also have a range of handouts that are available to you on the right-hand side. You'll see that we've popped 4 of them in there. So some of them are actually from the first session as well. If you did miss that session or if you were interested, we do have some handouts from there and some new ones today as well. If this content is triggering for you or anybody that you may know, we do have a range of national support services there. You'll see that handout in the right-hand side as well. So please feel free to use that. And unfortunately, last session we did have some difficulties recording, so we are going to aim to record this session again today and circulate this after the session along with the PowerPoint and handouts also. So please don't feel like you have to make notes as such. We will circulate everything after the session as well. Just a quick run through of what we will cover. So we will quickly do a recap of what was covered in the first session, which was targeted for children and young people. We'll then look at what is the latest in e-safety, and we'd love to have some questions from everybody as well. So if we can make this as interactive as possible, or if you do have any burning questions that you'd like to send through for our panel, we'd love to hear them, and we'll be able to stop and take questions as well at the end if there is anything you'd like to ask. So I'll quickly hand over to Brent to introduce the session and our speakers as well.
All right, so thank you, Laura. All right, so we'll start with our team. So Laura and I are part of the YMCA's National Safeguarding Team. There's 4 of us. We're led by the gentleman you can see now. His name is Phil Dorgan. He's our National Executive Manager. He's had an extensive career in safeguarding children and young people in the United Kingdom, essentially a jurisdiction that we would say is probably about 5 to 10 years ahead of us from safeguarding maturity. So fortunately, he's brought that expertise. We've also got Sky, and she'll introduce herself a little later to bring more expertise. So we're just packed to the brim. The team also has Debbie Boys, once again, an extensive career in child protection and safeguarding. We've got Laura, who you've just met, whose career has been in sport, policy, procedure, and practice. And myself, my job is probably not one of the exciting ones. It's risk management and business enablement. I've been fortunate to actually apply that to safeguarding within the Y. If you ever wanted to get in contact with us, we'll mention later on that we also have a reporting form if you've got any concerns about our staff behaviour. But you just want to ask any follow-up questions or see if we've got anything else on the horizon, you can just email us at safe@ymca.org.au. I will now pass on to the lovely Phoebe to give herself a bit of an introduction.
Hi, thanks, Brent. So my name is Phoebe. I work at a recreation centre in Thomastown called Track, and we're one of the centres under the branch of Y Whittlesea. I've been working for the Y for 4 years. I think that's what I tell people, 4 years, and I have loved it ever since I started, and I'm super passionate about youth work and working with young people and empowerment and leadership and education. So that's why I'm here today to continue the series.
And we're very lucky to have you, so thank you. And Sky.
Thanks, Brent. Yes, I'm Sky Rose. I'm a practice leader at Moores and practice primarily in the areas of workplace relations, so managing your people and child safety as well. And we've done some pretty extensive work across Australia in the context of child safety and empowering children following the Royal Commission, and ensuring organisations and our community are in a really good space to be able to protect children from some of the abuse that we're going to talk about today. So a real pleasure to be here. Thanks, Brent.
Thank you. All right, so I'll pass on to Phoebe to give us just a little quick recap for our last session that was aimed at children and young people, including the guide here.
Yeah, so last time we went over just a few tips and tricks on how to handle different types of situations that might make kids uncomfortable online. So I'll just go through the guide first, and hopefully I'll be able to squeeze in a few little bits as well. So first of all, we talked about our e-commitment, which is one of the handouts as well in this session, and it was a handout in the last one as well. But it's just a little bit of information of what you can expect from the Y in terms of do's and don'ts in our online programs. So that's definitely worth giving a read. On top of that, just getting to know the Y people. There's heaps of people out there dedicated to making sure that people are safe online. So there was a bit of information on how to follow on that. Then we went on to, thinking about who you're talking to, talk to your parents or caregivers, be aware of what content you're watching, what you're putting out online. So through your camera, your different information, that sort of thing, just kind of being aware on that. And we also made available a QR code that just allows kids to scan that. It'll take you to the safeguarding reporting page, and it'll take you to a local safeguarding lead who will follow on from that concern. And then on top of that, lastly, we just went over, for example, blocking or reporting or unfriending, just really simple ways of trying to limit your exposure to something that they may not like or feel safe or comfortable with. And yeah, we just went over a bit of information on that.
Awesome, thank you, Phoebe. So we'll kick on to the latest in e-safety, and Sky is going to lead the conversation on some apps out there that can pose a little bit of a threat to our children and young people.
Thanks, Brent. I think I know that a lot of you that are tuning in, might have children of your own or might have connections with children by virtue of the work that you're doing. And I think in the context of e-safety, it can be a pretty daunting exercise. What we know is that use of apps is skyrocketing. And use of apps by young people presents a really great way in this very strange world that we're currently living in for them to be able to connect with others, which is fantastic, given that we're all sort of isolating at the moment. And I think that creates great opportunity for connection, but it also creates opportunities for connections, perhaps with the wrong people, and presents some risks for our young people in terms of their online safety. And I know that we're going to come to some of those apps, but if we look at the role that adults can play, our community can play in sort of monitoring the use of those apps, we are actually seeing a spike in apps that can bury content that young people might not necessarily want their parents, their family members, or their friends to look at. One of the examples is the use of this calculator app. I think it's called Calculator Plus. Through which you can actually hide other apps. So you might actually have a relationship with your child where you know, you have an honest conversation with them about the apps that they've got on their phone and good online safety, but you're not necessarily going to be getting the full picture because of the availability of these apps to hide things like it might be digital images, which is commonly used for sex, and online videos as well. Just something for you to look out for in the context of your relationships with kids. I might come to TikTok, Mindcast, and House Party a little bit later, Brent, when we're sort of going through the apps in more detail.
For sure. All right, so cyberbullying is a pretty interesting topic at the moment. Obviously, as you were saying there, Sky, sadly, with the advent of new apps and new platforms, it's so much easier to connect than when Laura was talking about this morning that we had dial-up when we were growing up. That's the silver lining, I guess, is that it makes it easier for us to connect, especially during the coronavirus time. But the trouble is, obviously, we're allowing ourselves to connect with people that we're not so comfortable with. So this, I guess, harks back to what Phoebe was saying earlier. Last session was based upon, I guess, a three-tiered approach to limiting communication with people that you're not comfortable with or you just don't want to talk to. So including unfriending, which I guess is the lowest tier, which might just be you don't know the person or, you know, you see them at school, but you don't know them very well and you want to keep your posts that might, you know, make fun of anything on TV or whatever private, then you can just unfriend them. That in most instances, like Facebook, will limit most communication from people that you don't want to talk to. The next step would obviously be to block them, which actually means, as far as they can see online, you don't have a presence on that platform. The third thing, and you'll usually be asked this when you actually try and block someone, is do you want to report them? Do you want to let the platform know that their behavior has actually been so threatening to you that you might even be concerned that they might do it to someone else? So they might not have access to your profile because you've blocked them, but you want to make sure that they're not going to mimic that behavior to anybody else.
Yeah, I think they're really great practical tips. I think they're really great practical tips, Brendan. I might just jump in and with sort of the latest in e-safety and note that I think perhaps as a result of COVID or perhaps because, you know, as a society, we're becoming increasingly interconnected in an online way, there's actually been a 50% increase in terms of cyberbullying, primarily affecting young people, children and young people. 1 in 5 actually say that they've been cyberbullied online. And I think what's really interesting is that of the most recent survey that was conducted, I think it was by the Commission for Children and Young People, 55% said they actually sought help from their parents, which I think is an encouraging statistic and presents a real opportunity for people who want to lean into those honest conversations with their kids about what online safety might look like in a practical sense and the supports that might be available. The other statistic that I thought was really surprising is that 1 in 5 people actually said that they were participating in these behaviours. And given that we're all so insular in the way that we're looking at the moment, perhaps hiding behind a phone or a screen in terms of our connections with other people, which are so limited, I think that those statistics are only likely to increase, which I think also creates a real opportunity for people who work with kids, engage with kids, whether it's in sport or education or just through their role as parents, to have those conversations and to offer that support should it be required.
100%. I'll tack on to that one because I like the idea, obviously, of healthy conversations between children and young people and their parents and caregivers. So when we talk about reporting, it isn't necessarily just reporting to Facebook or reporting to the e-safety commissioner. Sometimes it's as simple as just reporting it to your parents. The trouble is these behaviors can only really continue when there is that sort of behind closed doors sort of attitude towards it. So obviously our priority would be, if you were to summarize any session that we've developed for e-safety, would be encourage them to talk, because you can't really support them unless you've got an idea of what's going on.
And I think that there's a real role for schools and sporting organisations or recreational organisations to play with that as well. We're starting to see codes of conduct by those organisations try to capture, I guess, the way in which people communicate either outside the schoolyard or outside of their sporting activity, on the basis that we want to, we want to be an inclusive, safe environment for everyone, and also in recognition that that behaviour is really damaging. So what I'm starting to see as an advisor for those organisations is schools step in and actually take action, disciplinary action against kids who might engage in cyberbullying or inappropriate use of apps online, even if that happens outside of the schoolyard. And equally in a sporting context, inappropriate messages or cyberbullying that's sort of been sent around to a team has been used as a basis to have a you know, a difficult conversation, but an important conversation with that young person about what's acceptable and the sort of behaviours that are unacceptable in that environment as well.
100%. And I think we'll move on to the next part, which is probably the easiest conversation to start with your children. What apps and platforms are you using? So this is a guide from the esafety Commissioner, and I absolutely adore it because I think it's actually quite easy to use. They do have a lot more resources than we do. So fortunately, that means that there's going to be up-to-date information on a range of apps as they are released and as they are updated. I'm just going to quickly show, we've got a QR code for anybody who's watching who might actually want to visit it just for the time being. But Sky's got some really killer examples of some apps out there that we should really keep an eye out for.
Yeah, the Calculator Plus one for people who you know, are concerned about their own children or people in their family is one to really look out for. But I think we're starting to see old apps be used in new ways to engage in, you know, cyberbullying. It might be that you're using Messenger to create a group, joining lots of people to it, really harassing people and then deleting that message so that there's sort of no trace of it whatsoever. In the context of TikTok, I think what we know is that 50% of users are 13 to 18, and some of the risks that creates are contact with strangers. So it might be that there's really that opportunity for kids to be engaging with people that they don't know, perhaps they shouldn't trust, and it's easy to sort of trust people you know, in that online environment. Creates opportunities for bullying. But I think one of the things that's probably not that well known is that you're in terms of the privacy settings, there's the opportunity for those locations to be shared. And I've worked in situations where a video has been posted and the child has been the subject of a family violence order, and those location services actually have enabled the location of that child to be revealed, which presented a really genuine and serious health and safety risk. So I think there's an opportunity for children and young people and their parents or people that, you know, are engaging with those people to have a discussion about those privacy settings. I think we might be coming to that at a later point in the presentation. And then in the context of Mindcast, 94% of what we know is that 94% of 4-year-olds are actually online, which is a staggering statistic. Although with COVID, you know, I think many people would probably use, you know, devices as a form of babysitter just to give parents a break if they can't leave the house, rightly or wrongly. And in the context of Mindcast, I think what we know is that there's been opportunities for grooming, and again, those privacy settings need to be checked really carefully. I think with House Party, the bigger issue is more that gate crashers can actually sneak into a forum, you know, a forum perhaps that feels a bit like a party online, and there's not necessarily any notification that you might get of that. So it gives you kind of chills thinking about people that might be sort of lurking in the background with that one. Again, another privacy feature to watch out for.
Thanks, Sky. And that's another benefit, I guess, of the esafety guide is if you do have a chance to click into this, it actually shows you how you can protect your information as well as how you can block people. So I think it's a pretty good resource. What else you'll notice in the top right-hand corner is they actually have a reporting button. So obviously you can pretty much directly engage with them to let them know one of 3 things. So whether you're experiencing cyberbullying, sexual, image-based abuse, or, hang on, I'm cheating. Or illegal and harmful content. We'll go into that one quite shortly, but I think it's a really good resource. As Sky might be able to help us out a little bit later in the presentation, they've actually had updates to legislation that will allow them, I guess, the authority to chase up some of those concerns in a way that certainly organizations like Moores and the Y, where we want to support you insofar as we can, as a government organization, they can take it that one step further.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we'll come on to sexual imagery and image-based abuse. This is essentially as probably what it's called, what it says. It's essentially abuse that's based upon like sexual imagery. So say, for example, somebody shares an image with somebody that they love and trust. That image is either shared non-consensually or was shared consensually, but the relationship might have broken down. The trouble is, obviously, as soon as you send an image like that, you no longer control it. So people are finding that they're either being blackmailed or, you know, in a more vindictive sense, people are just sending out those images for no reason whatsoever, short of trying to humiliate somebody. Now, Sky will back me up on this one in regards to whether the child sends a picture themselves or gives permission. They did find recently that there is I guess, a gap in the legislation in which if a child were to send a picture of themselves, it was actually deemed to be transmitting child pornography. But as I understand, there's been updates to try and address those gaps, at least if there's an appropriate age gap within the ages of consent. And I think that's about 2 years. Now, Sky, feel free to contradict me.
No, you're absolutely right. So, I think the key things to look out for here are, the crime of sexting and the crime of child pornography, both of which are horrible, obviously, but children can't consent to sending those sexual images of themselves by virtue of their age when there is that 2-year age gap. And even where consent is provided, it's something that can still be unlawful under our sexting laws. So they do sort of vary from state to state, so it's important to keep an eye out for that.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so now so what can you do if someone shares your child's images? This is where we come back to the esafety commissioner. From a legislative standpoint, you can report that using the button that we pressed before, and we'll show you again in the next slide. If it is shared, for example, on a social media platform, they've got a lot more leeway, I guess, in actually having those images removed from that particular platform or app. It's also, they're the ones who, I guess, steward the legislation that in regards to transmitting those images illegally. So obviously the repercussions are essentially administered by that agency. So if you've got any questions, you can obviously contact them, and we'll give you their website shortly towards the end of the presentation. We'll skip straight to their report abuse page. Once again, we've got the QR code coming up dramatically. Yep. If you guys want to have a quick look through there while we're having a chat on it. Once again, you'll notice in the top right-hand corner, they've got the report abuse button. It's only grayed out, obviously, because we're on the page. So this is a very good resource if you're actually not too sure what protections would be made available to your child or young person. Just as equally, to be perfectly frank, they would protect anyone really in regards to image-based abuse and cyberbullying. So if you're experiencing it yourself as well, there's no age limit.
Yeah, and I think that the reporting feature that is available through the esafety commissioner is fantastic. They've had really great success in a very short space of time, much more so than engaging with any of those online platforms, whether it's Insta or Facebook or any of the apps that we've talked about already. I think that there's a lot that can be done before this stage though, and I think it's really important to listen and to gather the facts and offer support to that person or young people, whether they've received an image or they've sent it. Make sure that if it's really serious, let's just say it's a sexual image that's been sent from the police, that you might engage with them before you delete that image. But it is really important for that image to be deleted at the earliest opportunity, because it might actually inadvertently place that child or young person at risk just by virtue of holding it. And I think that there's a really important educative exercise that can be undertaken then in terms of not victim blaming. I think people need to be aware of the consequences of their actions, but they might have shared an image but not consented to it being sent on. And I think that there's sometimes a missing part in that conversation. It's important to understand the consequences of our actions. So when you send an image, you might lose control over it, but that doesn't mean that you're responsible for the sharing of that image. And I think there's lots of really great online resources for people in the unfortunate position of needing to have that conversation. But I think that there's a lot of really great things that can come out of it. And hopefully you won't need to get to reporting that abuse. That's really it's an important step, but it's certainly not the only step that you can take.
We have, that's really great, Sky. We've actually just had a question come in as well. Is there any good advice around safe sexting? Telling young people to not do it won't work. We need to think about risk mitigation strategies. Would you, or even Phoebe as well, from a young person, have any thoughts on that?
I'd be really keen to hear from Phoebe.
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat? That's right, Laura. Yeah, I'm just having a bit of computer trouble.
No issues. Is there any good advice around safe sexting? Telling young people to do it won't work. We need to think about risk mitigation strategies. So I guess thinking if young people are going to do it, what could we kind of think about that might make it safer for them?
Sure. So first of all, yeah, completely right. Like telling a kid not to do it, they're probably more inclined to do it to satisfy. Yeah, in terms of safe sexting, obviously it's still really risky. But for example, making sure you've got nothing in it, like coming back to our last session, just making sure you've got nothing in the background that can give people information about where you live, where you work, any interests or hobbies that they might be able to locate you in, and having your face potentially out of the picture is probably another great way of doing that. That's probably one of the two big things that are discussed a lot. But yeah, it still has consequences, like you say, Sky, and it's still quite risky. But if we're going to take 2 steps, that's probably the 2 big ones.
Yeah, and I think the eSafety Commissioner came out with some data that said that I think it was 52% of people that they'd surveyed, children and young people that they'd surveyed, said that they were asked for a sexual image from someone that they didn't know. And, you know, it might seem obvious, but obviously sending those sorts of images to someone that you don't know is like one, you know, a further step removed in terms of trust. And I think that the stats in terms of people that are, the more that we can actually educate people about, you know, what can actually happen and the fact that it can be a crime, I think the more they are less likely to actually do it. But I think time will tell. We're kind of on the precipice, I think, of a crazy new online world.
Thank you. That was really good. And another one that we've often discussed is not sending something that might get a body part that might give you away, like obvious tattoos as well. But I love that, Phoebe, the background, being conscious of that, face out of it, and also thanks for the input, Sky. And another one we've discussed as a team is on what platform you may send it. So even though the risk is still there, some like Snapchat, where the image goes away straight after, rather than ones that store the image, WhatsApp and things like that, maybe the other mitigation strategies as well. So
I know that Snapchat has an add-on application by which people can actually take screenshots or save those images. So you do need to look out for that. I think the feature is now that you get the person who sends the image gets notified if a person has done that, which is an important feature, but I'm not sure if that happens across the board.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, so we'll move on to the very exciting topic of antiviruses. Now, I'll go through this one relatively quickly, but we've got some good information in regards to parental controls and some password tips. But long story short, an antivirus is obviously an add-on software. You usually have to pay for it, but in most phones, it's actually automatically downloaded or it's part of the operating system. Long story short is it supports, I guess, it supports you to understand who's actually accessing your computer or the computer of your children and young people. So it puts up firewalls, for example, so that at the very least, if it doesn't mean that their computer is unhackable, it certainly is harder to do so. So usually that will support you to protect your password. It will support you to protect who's got access to seeing your camera when you're not actually intending someone to see you through your camera and that kind of thing. We've got more information of that on the eSafety Commission website as well, so I'll skip past that one there. If you've got any questions, obviously, chuck them through the chat or send them to safe@ymca, but otherwise we'll skip through to parental controls, and Phoebe's going to give us a good insight into these.
Yeah, cool. So parental controls are essentially content filters for most it's computers, but you can have it in television. I know that there's a way that you can do it through television now. There's content filters on video games, your mobiles. There's different software that you can put content filters on as well, which essentially assists you in restricting the content that parents or caregivers might deem inappropriate or a bit too mature for the child of their age. With parental controls, you can put a time limit on the use of a certain device. You can limit the time they've spent on a particular website or on a particular game. You can restrict their access completely to certain types of websites or certain types of content. And lastly, you can monitor their activity. You can see where they've been. Parental controls, you can either download specific software or, which is probably better what I'm about to say, just going through the simple settings of the content that your child uses, because you can usually fix a lot of the common problems that parents might be using parental controls for.
Awesome, thank you. The one thing that needs to be considered though with parental controls is often they're applied in an umbrella setting. So sometimes you might find that your children and young people actually want to visit a site that has been blocked by a setting that you've selected, but you might not even be aware of that. So I think it's important, obviously, to have those conversations with your children and young people to determine what sites that they're visiting, to at least check just in case. You don't want, obviously, an argument with your child just because a site that you actually don't mind them visiting has been blocked amongst the suite of others with similar settings and hashtags and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that going too far, you might actually miss the opportunity for your child or young person to learn some really important things from the internet. Like, a lot of people are educated, receive their education on, sexting, what is sex. It might, either from their friends or by searching online. And I think if your controls are too strict, you miss that educative opportunity. And I think that's just something to keep in mind, because we don't want to be helicopter societies denying children and young people of the right and the delight of sort of learning about these sorts of things on their own as well, just in a safe way.
Amazing point. Thank you, Sky. So I'll run through some quick password tips that you can share with your children and young people and maybe take on yourself. So with your passwords, try not to use personal information, because if someone has actually got software or it's got the skills to work out what your password is, you're actually giving more than you want to anyway. Consider harder to remember passwords, because if they're harder to remember, they're harder to guess. Swap letters with symbols. It sounds like a silly trick, but I mean, easily you could spell pretty much Sean with a $ instead, and it's a little bit harder to guess that kind of thing. Try and use unique passwords. Don't use a blanket password for every platform and app that you use, and regularly update them. Phoebe will talk about, I think it's important to have, once again, those conversations with your children and young people about passwords as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like before any of that, like I love that we're coming back to always having a conversation about it, because it's such a simple fix and everyone can understand things a bit better and educate ourselves in what's going on. But firstly, just get to know the content that your child is viewing. Like, ask them a simple question. If they're on their phone or if they've just come off their computer, oh, what were you up to? Super easy. There's nothing wrong with asking that question, and hopefully they give you an honest answer of what they were doing, and you might learn exactly what it is they're doing. If you still feel like you need parental controls, like obviously places like schools would use parental controls to limit potentially harmful software, just downloading viruses accidentally onto the computer. But if you're a parent or a caregiver needing to have that conversation, make the plan with them. Ask them what they think about what you're trying to do and why, and just hopefully they will understand exactly why you as a parent or caregiver is wanting to do this as well. Because if you just put the parental controls on, or if you do just look at their computer and see what they're doing, that just initiates a huge cycle of distrust. And kids are growing up on technology, like that statistic that you threw out, Sky, of what was it, 98%?
94% of 4-year-olds are online.
Oh my god, like that's crazy. And so like we are getting to know technology so easily. We're making our way through it. We're understanding it a lot better as young people in technology. So if they wanted to, potentially they could get around you and just do it anyway. So just have that chat, and hopefully you won't even need to ask for their password or have parental controls. You will just be on the same page of watching out for certain content and just being aware. So yeah, definitely super important just to chat and involve your child in your concerns.
Yeah, Phoebe, that's so great. We just had a comment come in that if your child is looking at something or something concerning pops up, to keep calm and don't overreact. Otherwise, they might not tell you next time. So I think that really echoes exactly what you're saying, and building that circle of trust as well. And even encouraging them to teach you something as well, like tell me more about that, or what are you looking at, because there's so much that we would not be aware of online.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want them to not be curious. Sorry, Phoebe, you go. Don't want them to not be curious. You just want them to be informed about the risks. And I think there's a really important distinction there. You don't want them to not look for information. I think, a curious mind is a really positive thing. We just don't want them to be unnecessarily exposed.
For sure. I was literally about to say that, and a follow on from that. Whatever is coming up on the internet that your child is looking at, it's not their fault that that's there. So a good point on keeping calm and don't overreact, because it's not their fault that they've just looked at that, unless they've actively seeked it out, in which case, again, having a chat as to why that might concern you is so much better, especially in a calm manner. Because there's nothing to blame. Like, obviously you're putting out your own personal information, what your child puts out, that's what you can control, that's what they can control. So that's definitely worth having a lot of emphasis on. But just what's out there, you can't blame your child for it. So having that air out and not be part of the conversation at all, super important.
Yeah, a lot of those reactions come from a place of fear that your child or the young person that you're concerned about might be at risk, or fear of, what they will learn, or fear of what they will do. And I think that, you can't get too swept away with that. If you're able to keep a cool head about it, you'll have a much better conversation.
And I think to tack onto that as well, Sky, we find, as we sort of start talking about reporting safeguarding concerns, if you think your child has been exposed to something inappropriate, when your child is disclosing it, it is fear as well as guilt in some instances. And the trouble is, like you were saying with some of those apps, people unfortunately are remarkably clever at finding new ways to speak with children and young people against their parents' wishes. I mean, recently there was a news article about people using transfers from the CommBank app to transfer 1 cent with a slur. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that the bank description transfer was actually, something that was actually abusive and threatening. People are remarkably talented at finding new ways to make people feel unsafe. So I think you're right. It comes from that fear, but also a little bit of guilt. Unfortunately, there's going to be instances where we can't always protect our children and young people, but that education is so vital in those conversations that we can only do what we can do. And I think it is important to make sure that they feel comfortable to ask us a follow-up question. If somebody is asking them something weird online, like when they can talk to anyone, even their own friend at the same age of maybe 14 might be like, doesn't smell right to me. So I think it is important to sort of like try and keep our like knee-jerk reactions of the fear and the guilt of being like, that's disgusting, you're never going to go online ever again, to actually having those conversations.
Yeah, and good luck enforcing that one.
Yeah. All right, so speaking about that kind of thing, actually, we'll skip on to keeping us accountable. So this is a little bit of a plug of our next session, which is largely much more focused on organizational stuff, for recreational organizations, sporting organizations, and childcare organizations. A quick thing before I do forget, Morse has actually got some really good resources on their website, and we've got the link later on in the presentation that you guys can click onto, where you can see some draft codes of conduct that obviously explain to your staff the best way to behave when you're engaging with child-related servicing. We can speak, and I'm going to invite Sky to add anything to that afterwards. We can only really speak at the moment for the why. The why, because of obviously the new environment with everything requiring to be undertaken online. We've developed an e-commitment. As Phoebe was saying a little bit earlier, it's plain and simply what do's and don'ts for what our staff are committing to do for children and young people if we actually do start to talk to them online. So it's a simple things of, it might sound ridiculous, but it's just to make sure that children and young people are assured that we will not send them, sexual imagery and that kind of thing. We will not bully them online. It's important to note that when a lot of organizations have got these sorts of authority documents, so when you are actually thinking that your children and young people are safe because they're engaging with a known organization, you can go that step further and know exactly what we're committing to you as parents and caregivers, as well as to the children and young people themselves.
And I think it's so important to have done that, Bren. I think it's so important. I think it's so important to have done that in light of COVID as well, because the way in which we engage with everyone has changed. Services that would have only been delivered face to face are now only online, and so a lot of the codes of conduct that I see out there haven't actually been sort of updated to take account of new technologies, and haven't been updated to take account of the fact that everything is now online. So you will have online interactions with children because your services have pivoted online. So I think that that's another really great example of things that organizations can do that we'll probably come to a bit more in the next session.
100%. And as Sky was saying a little bit earlier, like the esafety resources and reporting page is a fantastic step, but it's not the only step. in the instance of the Y, we actually have a reporting portal so that children and young people, or yourselves, if you were to hear something from them, a disclosure from them, you can report it directly to the National Safeguarding Unit so that we can support. And even if it's as simple as a miscommunication, then we can at least sort out some training that educates our staff on what's appropriate and what isn't. But on the other side, obviously, if necessary, we can take formalized steps in regards to the behavior of our staff, volunteers, and even peers and you know, participants in your programs with you. All right, so I'll let our dear friend Phoebe go through our guide for parents and caregivers. It's very similar to the content for children and young people, but because obviously we've got the shared message in there.
Yes. Okay, so once again, coming back to the guide for young people. So getting to know the why, the E commitment that's up, getting to know the session that your child's watching or being a part of and exactly what they're talking about, and just check in with your child as well and just see, you know, what did you learn from that session? What do you think? You know, just make sure that they're getting the most out of these sessions as well. Furthermore, based off of what we've talked about as well, consider parental controls, but we've kind of spoken more towards just consider talking with your child and, you know, understanding what they're doing and what content they're viewing, and then go through settings and controls with them. But that's one thing to consider. Also consider how long they're spending online. So you maybe agree to set a time limit with your child as to how much they're spending their time on YouTube or you know, on Facebook, or how long they're scrolling through TikTok. Just agree on a certain amount of time, especially with COVID. It's so easy to sink hours down the drain in front of a screen, because what else are you gonna do? But just try really hard to limit that as much as you can. On top of that, try and stay educated with what's out there, new apps, new websites, new platforms, just so you can kind of stay a little bit ahead, because kids are always on top of it. We always know what's out there. So try and keep yourself kind of on the same page. And lastly, if you see, hear, or feel anything that worries you or concerns you, just tell someone. Tell your child if you think it's happened to them. Speak to someone that you know. You know, there's the QR code up there on that page as well that you can use in the yellow box, and that'll take you to the safeguarding reporting page. And that'll get you in contact with a local safeguarding lead, and you can talk your concerns through with them as well.
You're amazing, Phoebe. Thank you. Just noting that we've only got a couple of minutes left. I think I'll just slam through the rest here to make sure that you guys can see what's going to be available when we send through the presentation as well as the video. So obviously we did have a bit of a chat about the importance of having a chat with or speaking with children and young people. Sometimes it's as simple as asking them, what are you up to? What's like, you know, or tell me something exciting about the new platform that you're investigating. That kind of, not investigating. So obviously I've become too much of an adult and using ridiculous language, but it's a bit of a test for me, you see. Anyway, but that kind of thing is pretty much asking, you know, like Phoebe said, I mean, what else are you going to do? So if they are on their phone a lot, like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, what are you playing on? Like, how are your friends going? That kind of thing. You've got a unique instance for now because everything is online and that pressure is to stay home. Unfortunately, even more so for Victoria because we're going backwards a little bit. But obviously that shows it's a unique situation where you're not necessarily being nosy. You're just sort of asking how their day's going. And because technology is such a large part of their day, you're asking two birds, one stone. As we said, where do I get the most up-to-date information was the eSafety Commissioner's website, which we have got right in front of us here. We'll have to run through this one, but we will send a presentation through to you guys so that you can click on. We'll have to update the YMCA Australia's reporting website. We'll send that through in our email shortly. These three URL codes in order. First one is the one that you should ignore. It's the old YMCA one. The middle one is Moore's. Now, I do apologize, Sky. I had to skip straight through the really awesome resources that you've got there, but those codes of conduct are valuable. So do take a minute to have a look through there and see if it's appropriate for your organization. We'll be able to discuss those a little bit more in our session in a fortnight. And we're hoping to see a lot of you come back for that as well, for the different contexts for organizations that undertake childcare, sport and rec and that kind of thing as well. So do we have any other questions that popped up, Laura, we might want to address before we run on?
No, that was it. Thank you. Thank you, Phoebe, Sky, and Brent for hosting that, our wonderful panel speakers. And yeah, we hope to see you all back in a fortnight to talk about organisations. So thank you so much, and thanks. See you next time.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.